On September 22, 1980, the world watched in shock as Iraqi forces launched a surprise attack on neighboring Iran. This sudden and unprovoked aggression caught many by surprise, as tensions between the two nations had been simmering but had not yet reached a boiling point. The international community was left scrambling to respond to this unexpected escalation. Iraqi jets bombed Iranian airfields with precision, aiming to cripple Iran's air capabilities and gain air superiority. The airstrikes were relentless, targeting key military installations and infrastructure, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Simultaneously, ground troops crossed the border on multiple fronts, advancing deep into Iranian territory. The coordinated assault was designed to overwhelm Iranian defenses and create a swift path to victory. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, confident in his military's strength, hoped for a swift victory. He aimed to capitalize on the perceived weakness of the newly established Islamic Republic of Iran, which was still consolidating power after the 1979 revolution. Hussein believed that a quick and decisive war would bolster his position in the region and secure valuable territory. The invasion marked the beginning of a brutal 8-year conflict that would claim hundreds of thousands of lives and leave a lasting impact on the Middle East. Cities were reduced to rubble and the human cost was staggering. The war would become one of the longest and most devastating conflicts of the 20th century. Initial Iraqi advances were swift, capturing Iranian territory and key cities with relative ease. The early successes gave the Iraqi leadership a false sense of security, believing that victory was within their grasp. However, the Iranian military, still reeling from the revolution, struggled to mount an effective defense in the early stages of the war. Despite their initial disarray, the Iranians began to regroup and organize a formidable resistance. The conflict would soon evolve into a grueling war of attrition, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory. The seeds of the Iran-Iraq War were sown long before the 1980 invasion. At the heart of the conflict lay a complex web of historical grievances, territorial disputes, and power struggles. The Shatt al-Arab waterway, a strategically vital estuary forming the border between the two countries, became a focal point of contention. Control over the waterway, crucial for oil exports, had been a source of tension for decades. Adding fuel to the fire was a desire for regional dominance. Saddam Hussein harbored ambitions of establishing Iraq as the leading power in the Persian Gulf region. He saw a weakened Iran grappling with the aftermath of revolution as an opportunity to assert Iraqi dominance. The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran had dramatically altered the regional balance of power. The streets of Tehran were filled with jubilant crowds celebrating the overthrow of a regime that had ruled for decades. This revolution was not just a local event, it had far-reaching implications for the entire Middle East. The overthrow of the US-backed Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and the establishment of an Islamic Republic led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini sent shockwaves through the Middle East. The new regime promised to export its revolutionary ideals beyond Iran's borders, challenging the status quo and threatening the interests of both regional and global powers. Saddam Hussein viewed the revolution with deep suspicion. As the leader of Iraq, he was acutely aware of the potential for instability that the Iranian revolution could inspire within his own borders. The rise of a theocratic government in Iran posed a direct ideological challenge to his secular Ba'athist regime. He feared the spread of Islamic revolutionary fervor to Iraq's own Shia majority population, which had long faced discrimination under his Sunni-dominated regime. The Shia in Iraq, inspired by their counterparts in Iran, could potentially rise up against his rule, leading to internal chaos and weakening his grip on power. Moreover, the revolution had left Iran's military in disarray. The once formidable Iranian armed forces were now a shadow of their former selves. The purging of experienced military officers and the restructuring of the military hierarchy had severely compromised Iran's defensive capabilities. Many high-ranking officers had been purged, and the new Islamic government was struggling to maintain order. The internal chaos and the lack of a coherent military strategy made Iran appear vulnerable to external threats. Ayatollah Khomeini and his government were more focused on consolidating their power and dealing with internal dissent than on preparing for potential external aggression. Saddam calculated that a swift and decisive strike against a weakened Iran would secure his regional ambitions and eliminate a potential threat. He believed that by capitalizing on Iran's moment of vulnerability, he could not only prevent the spread of revolutionary fervor, but also position Iraq as the dominant power in the Persian Gulf. The invasion of Iran in 1980 was a bold and calculated move, driven by a mix of fear, ambition, and the desire to reshape the regional order in Iraq's favor. Despite early setbacks, Iran, under Khomeini's leadership, proved to be a much more resilient adversary than Saddam Hussein had anticipated. The initial phase of the war saw Iran struggling to cope with the surprise and intensity of the Iraqi invasion. However, Khomeini's unwavering resolve and the leadership of the Iranian military began to turn the tide. Fueled by a potent blend of revolutionary zeal and nationalist sentiment, Iranians rallied to defend their country. The spirit of the 1979 revolution was still fresh, and the populace was determined to protect their newfound sovereignty. Massive rallies and demonstrations showcased the unity and determination of the Iranian people, who were ready to make any sacrifice for their homeland. Iran's military, though initially outmatched, gradually regrouped and adapted to the demands of the conflict. Training camps were established to prepare new recruits, and experienced soldiers shared their battlefield knowledge. The Iranian forces began to develop new strategies and tactics to counter the Iraqi advances, learning from each engagement and becoming more effective over time. They implemented unconventional tactics, including human wave attacks, utilizing their large population to wear down the Iraqi forces. These tactics, though costly in terms of human lives, demonstrated the Iranians' willingness to endure great hardships for their cause. The sheer number of Iranian soldiers often overwhelmed the Iraqi defenses, forcing them into a defensive posture. The conflict morphed into a grueling war of attrition, with neither side able to achieve a decisive victory. Trench warfare and prolonged battles became the norm as both nations dug in for a long and exhausting struggle. The front lines shifted back and forth, but significant breakthroughs remained elusive. The war dragged on, causing immense suffering and devastation on both sides. Iran's vast oil reserves allowed it to sustain its war effort, while Iraq relied heavily on financial support from its Arab neighbors, particularly Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. The economic aspect of the war was crucial, as both countries needed substantial resources to continue fighting. Iran's ability to maintain its oil production despite the conflict was a testament to its resilience. Meanwhile, Iraq's alliances with other Arab states provided it with the necessary funds and supplies to keep its military operations going. This financial backing was vital for Iraq, as it faced the challenge of a prolonged and costly war. The Iran-Iraq war exacted a horrific toll on the civilian populations of both countries. Major cities came under frequent bombardment, resulting in widespread death and destruction. The conflict also witnessed the abhorrent use of chemical weapons, primarily by Iraq. Saddam Hussein's regime deployed mustard gas and nerve agents against Iranian troops and Kurdish civilians within Iraq, who were perceived as sympathetic to Iran. The chemical attacks, condemned by the international community, left thousands dead and many more suffering from long-term health complications. The war's impact extended beyond immediate casualties. It shattered economies, displaced millions, and left psychological scars that would linger for generations. The Iran-Iraq war sent shockwaves through the international community, raising concerns about regional stability and the potential for the conflict to escalate into a wider war. The use of chemical weapons by Iraq drew widespread condemnation, but concrete action to stop the fighting proved elusive. The United Nations Security Council passed numerous resolutions calling for a ceasefire, but these were largely ignored by the warring parties. Various diplomatic initiatives were launched by international organizations and individual countries, but none succeeded in bringing about a lasting peace. The conflict became increasingly entangled in Cold War politics, with the United States, Soviet Union, and their respective allies providing support to the warring parties. By the mid-1980s, the conflict had reached a bloody stalemate. Neither Iran nor Iraq could achieve a decisive military victory, and both sides were economically and militarily exhausted. Millions of lives had been lost, and the human and economic costs of the war were mounting. In 1988, after 8 years of brutal fighting, Iran and Iraq finally agreed to a ceasefire brokered by the United Nations. The ceasefire, formalized in UN Security Council Resolution 598, came into effect on August 20, 1988. While the ceasefire marked the official end of the fighting, the underlying issues that had fueled the conflict remained unresolved. The Iran-Iraq War stands as one of the deadliest conflicts in the latter half of the 20th century. While estimates vary, it is believed that the war claimed the lives of between 500,000 and 1 million people, with millions more injured or displaced. Both Iran and Iraq suffered immense economic damage. Oil infrastructure was devastated, cities lay in ruins, and the cost of rebuilding was staggering. The war left both countries deeply in debt, hindering their post-war recovery and development. The human toll extended beyond immediate casualties. The conflict created millions of refugees and internally displaced persons, straining resources and exacerbating social and economic problems.